All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to everyone who's here to help us celebrate Canadian music and Canadian composers in this Canada Music Week. This is very exciting. I'm so happy to be here with Nicholas and Angelina and Martha to just discuss all things music. And just to get to know you a bit better, get to know what you have done, what you are doing. So I am going to start off with a question to kind of get things on the roll. And I want to introduce Angelina. So Angelina, I met this summer at a mini Sizzler, and she's just a delightful person to work with. Um, does all the music things, teaching, composing. She was part of a workshop for improvisation this summer, and also just had the most adorable baby girl. And I think currently living in London or close to London, Ontario. So Angelina, just to ask you first, how did you know that you wanted to compose? How did that journey get started for you? Was this something that you knew from day one of starting music lessons, or did you kind of just learn your love of composing as you studied music and were involved?
Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be with you this morning. Um, yeah, that's a great question. So I actually came to playing piano a bit later. So I was 11 when I started lesson, but within about a year or two, I started to just love making things up. And I wasn't really doing that in lesson time or anything like that. I wasn't encouraged necessarily to improvise. But definitely improv was how I got to love composition. And I think I had the advantage of having a teacher who sort of listened to some of my nonsense at times in lessons where I was just playing around and she would encourage it, even though she wasn't actively asking me to. She gave me that opportunity and then would encourage me to write out my ideas. And that's essentially how I got started. Um, yeah, and I guess it just grew over time and was something that I especially came back to later on in life. Yeah.
That's really cool. And that's so important to have kind of that mentor that is encouraging you to grow in that and doesn't just say, oh, well, that's not what I asked you to practice this week. It's just, yeah, like be creative, find what you can do. And yeah. Oh, that's so exciting. Thank you. All right, the next person I'm going to ask this is Martha Hill Duncan, and I had the privilege of meeting and working with Martha at Summer Sizzle in, I believe it was Mount Forest first, many, many years ago. And she now lives in Kingston, Ontario. And Canada stole her from the US a number of years ago and we're very happy that you're here now. So Martha, how did you get started with composing, or when did you get started with composing?
Well, similarly, I like to make up stuff. I was not a great piano student. I always misbehaved, changed the endings, swung Bach, did everything wrong. And fortunately, I had a very loving, encouraging teacher who, put her foot down and said, "Well, if you're not going to follow the rules, then go write your own music." And I was very young. She handed me a manuscript book. I tell this story all the time. And she said, go home and make your own stuff because you're not honoring the composers you're playing. And I thought, wow, what a great idea. And I went home and made my little piece. I'm sure it was not, completely accurate. And, it was very childlike. And I titled it and everything. And when I came back to my lesson and she played it, I was just blown away. I just knew that's what I was going to do the rest of my life. There was no question. That's where I belonged. It just felt so amazing that I could write something a week ago in another location and bring it in and have a person look at that visually and recreate it. And so, yeah, I knew that I was going to be creating music. I didn't know where it was going to fall or anything like that. But, and then I got more serious as a student too, because you need all these skills to be able to do these dreams, right? So it was pretty cool to have such um, a wonderful, supportive, and patient teacher, as a child.
That's so neat that you knew that from a young age. How old would you have been approximately?
Sure, I was 7 or 8. Yeah, yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Oh my goodness, I hadn't even started piano lessons yet at that age.
I wasn't a child prodigy. I was nothing like that, but I knew that the visual and that whole eye hand coordination thing, the touch, all that was just right from the beginning. Yeah.
Mhm. I don't think being a prodigy is necessarily the most important thing. It's more like if you have a passion for it and you're willing to let that be nurtured and just grow in that, right? And build the skills that you need to be able to do whatever you're doing effectively. Wow, what a cool way to come into composition. Kudos to your teacher as well. So you both have had some really good teachers that have just fostered your love of creating.
Mhm.
All right, and we're gonna move on to Nicholas. Now, Nicholas is from our west coast of our beautiful country, from Victoria, BC, and I'm super excited to be meeting you for the first time and getting to know you today. Nick, how did you know that you wanted to be a composer, um, when you first started, and how old were you approximately when you knew that?
Well, I grew up in a really musical family. My parents were both amateur musicians, and there was chamber music going on in our house several times a week because my parents were string players, and my two brothers and my sister and I um, just kind of absorbed all that music when we were very young, and I think several of us started writing tunes down when we were maybe 9 or 10, had done a little bit of theory. Um, and I know that in my early teens, I played around with writing pieces for my family to play, little trios and quartets and so on. I didn't really have any guidance at that time, but it was really fun to be able to write out these parts and give them to members of my family and say, okay, let's see how this sounds. And I don't know what's happened to all those early pieces now. They may be in a box somewhere. But later on, I guess a big influence on the development of my composing skills was study of the pipe organ. Pipe organ was really my first instrument, and I had my first church music job at the age of 18. And if you know anything about the role of the organ in liturgical church music, you end up improvising a lot, little fillers. So I was involved in Anglican church music, and so accompanying the liturgy, accompanying the choirs, um, and then sometimes directing the choir from the organ. Um, and so I would make up music at the keyboard, and then I'd write it down and so forth. Um, and that was how I got started, really.
That's really interesting. It's always a good way to learn is just to be thrown into something and then you have to figure it out and then you realize that, oh, I can actually do this. That's really cool. Let's do more of that. I'm gonna actually just go off of what you were talking about because you were saying that you have kind of written for a lot of different types of ensembles and stuff. Is that your preferred um do you prefer writing for chamber groups or choirs is when you're composing, or do you like writing for solo instruments as well, or kind of just everything?
I would have to say I'll write for anything, any solo instrument, any combination of instruments, if an opportunity arises. Um, because I've spent a lot of my life directing choirs, of course, I've had guinea pigs, to write for. Um, and they didn't seem to complain too much when I said, "Oh, here's another piece I've written. Let's try it out, please." Um, and I find that using text as a platform or as an inspiration for writing music is works very well for me. So writing songs for solo singers or writing choral music um, comes perhaps more easily to me than writing pure instrumental music.
That makes sense. And last question, and then I will move the spotlight to someone else. Um, do you compose? So you said that the text is kind of your inspiration. How do you find the text? Is that just you're reading through a book of poems or something, and you're like, oh, this is just such, these words are so beautiful. I have to create some music to go along with that. Or do you write music to comment on some to make some kind of social commentary, or do you like to have it as an educational tool to expose students or your choirs or your audience to different historical or new styles or techniques?
Uh, Probably all of the above. Sometimes I'm reading a book, and it doesn't have to be poetry. It might be prose, and I might come across a particular passage that I like, and so I'll write it down and file it away for future consideration. Um, Sometimes I'm asked to write something on a particular text, and so I have to be able to identify with or like the text, of course, before I can write for it. And occasionally I've said, look, I'm sorry, I can't work with this text. If you got something else. Um, so in a few cases when I've been collaborating with writers, they'll send me a whole bunch of poems that they maybe have written, and I'll pick one or two that work for me. Um, in terms of themes, in the last few years, I've been particularly interested in writing music about the environment because I feel strongly that as musicians, composers, we may not be able to do anything scientifically about climate change, or we can ride our bike instead of driving our car, and we can do little things like that everybody can do. But perhaps as musicians and as composers, we can reach out to the rest of the world through our music and say something about the environment and how we need to care for it and so forth. And so lately, when I've been looking for texts for choral music, I've been looking particularly for texts about global warming or um, changing climates, the drought, or other kinds of environmentally related themes. And I've just finished now in a draft stage a fairly large work for chorus and orchestra. It's about 40 minutes long, I think, called, I think I'm going to call it something like Earth Cantata. And I'm hoping that I can organize a performance of this sometime in 2026. So
That's
so
very cool. Yeah. And I think, yeah, music is so powerful, and I love when it can be used to kind of challenge what people might normally be thinking about something and just be like, hey, did you think about it this way ever? And it's so interesting when composers can use that to help people think about something differently. All right, thank you. Angelina, I'm gonna go back over to you and start off by asking if you have a favorite um, ensemble that you like writing for, or type of ensemble or instrument, because there's so many timbres of instruments and everything that is there anything that draws you specifically, or are you kind of like Nicholas and you're like, honestly, give me a musical instrument, I will write for it and be very happy.
I think actually for me, I enjoy writing for the piano because that's the instrument I understand the best. I'm most proficient at it. So I would say piano for sure.
Yeah. It's always nice to just know that you understand an instrument inside and out and you know that somebody else is going to be able to play it well. I know I've composed for a couple of other instruments sometimes too, and I'm like, I think this should be okay. I think you should be able to play it, but hopefully it's not like super uncomfortable or something accidentally, you know? And why do you write music? What is your purpose behind it?
I think the quick answer would be for the sheer love of it. I love a good melody and I love expressing myself through music. But another aspect that's really important to me as a piano teacher is to write music that's fun and beautiful and enjoyable at all levels. So I feel passionate actually about writing pieces for younger students that they can enjoy what they're working on, even at the beginner, elementary level. I think that's something that also allows me to work in some of my just pedagogical purposes, like what do I want the student to work on in this piece, or what kind of techniques can they benefit from through learning this work. So I think it's a bit twofold for me there, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to blend your passion of teaching and composing. Um, that's really cool. I'm sure your students will love when you write a piece for them specifically or for a class or something. That's really cool. All right, Martha, do you have an ensemble or an instrument that you like composing for specifically?
Well, the first things that the first instrument that I wrote for, and I am a pianist, and I definitely feel very comfortable writing for piano. But really, my my primary start was in vocal writing, and I, like Nicholas, love text, and I imagined myself as a poet when I was, as some kind of poet when I was in high school and early university, and they weren't great, but I just love that creating of words, and so it's so much more fun to take somebody else's text that's perfect and just write and set it to song and to you know promote it in a totally different way than it does with just the flat words on the page. Somehow um, the ability to be able to take the words and really highlight them in another way musically is a great challenge. And I love the voice, and I love writing for singers, and singers are so adventurous and dramatic, and they're expressive, and they're so much fun to write for. And so when I'm writing for uh, voice, I feel like I have a lot of freedom to be more dramatic and profound, and I love the limitation that these are the words. How are you going to set them? Whereas if I start a piano piece, there's a huge possibility, but with the words that, I like having those limitations, and it really makes me get down to work right away. And I like writing for choirs too, but I think probably I like the art song, genre best, to really do a set. And also, I like writing in thematic kind of works, so that I'm not interested in writing one little song or one little piano piece. I like the idea of getting into a thematic zone and maybe a whole collection or a whole, um, song cycle or something like that. Because the deeper I dig, the more ideas I have, and why stop at, one little 2 or 3 page piece, when I've got this brain and my imagination going, it's much more fun to kind of cook into within that theme. But I'll write for strings, I'll write for brass, and I'll write for anything. Uh, if somebody asks me to, if I have the time, because music to me, music is music. But if there's a voice in there, that's bonus. Yeah.
That's amazing. And when you're looking for text, um, how do you decide that this is the one that you need to write some music for?
I think the most important thing for me is that it's timeless. A lot of the poetry of people who've passed and it's in public domain, you can use the text. Sometimes it's very dated and it doesn't travel well across centuries. When I first started writing vocal music in Canada, I was again trying desperately to be a Canadian. And so I went down to the rare book collection at Queen's University here in Kingston, and also the downtown library had a huge collection of early, like original poetry, anthologies and books and stuff like that. And I just went crazy. And I became really kind of obsessed with Canadian poets from, I guess they call it the Confederation period, but a lot of women, uh, poets who, like me, had come from across the ocean. I came across the border, but they had come across the ocean to this vast, cold climate, for whatever reason. And a lot of the poetry was about being in a new country and the beauty and the vastness of the landscape and the homesickness. So I could really, really relate to. So I just like something that I can be expressive. It feels personal and timeless. Yeah. And I love living writers. That's the best because then you can say, "Can I change that one word, or can you add another word?" Sometimes they're willing, and they sometimes say, "What?" Anyway, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. You said something about that you liked writing your own words, but you prefer to work with the words of other people because they're perfect and everything. But I once had a friend tell me, which I loved this in my own performing and anything that I'm doing, that there's such a beauty actually in imperfection, which I think as musicians is something important to embrace because you were saying that you like having words that you connect with. And I think if we show that we're human and we're not perfect, then there's a certain kind of beauty that comes along with that people can really appreciate. Um,
I think you're right for sure. With the piano and instrumental stuff, I can swear musically. I can make all kinds of crazy, uh, musical proclamations, and nobody knows really what I'm saying. But with poetry and with words, it's like it's just a little bit too exposed. Although I do a little bit with younger writing. I have done some, and that feels okay because it's like you're talking to your students or you're talking to a grandchild or you're the librarian talking to kids in the library. But when it becomes older and more serious, and it feels a little exposed. I'm okay with that musically, but with words, I feel a little shyer, which is hard to believe. But yeah.
That's funny. You had said that you like kind of the parameters that the text gives you when you're working with something vocally. How do you set up any parameters for yourself for piano music or for instrumental music? You said that's a little more difficult, but do you have kind of a way to make that feel a little more achievable?
Yeah, I think we're so lucky that we have this whole Canadian system of leveling because if I get an assignment for somebody or I want to do a book or I and somebody says it needs to be a level 5 or 6, because I've taught for so many years, I'm in that groove. I know where I'm, going to write. I know the link, that kind of thing. And the funny thing is, I'm working on a project with an American composer, Winan Rossi. We're doing a joint series called Prehistoric Piano. Don't tell anybody. But the ideas that they have in the US for their elementary, late elementary, it's so different. And it's like, really? You're not going to let me do that? You mean I can't go about it's just I just think Canada is so enlightened in their music education, but it's you still have to be creative and you still have to get find. So I like it. I like having the rules and the limitations. It's fun. It's a challenge, And how close can I get to that limitation, cross the line a little bit, but still stay within what they've asked.
I think again with performing, we do that as well, right? It's like we have these notes and we have kind of the idea that the composer is going for, but it's also like, how can I add my own flavor to this performance? And some people are a little more risque with that. But it does, parameters do force you to be more creative. What are you gonna do with the limited materials that you have? Perfect. All right. Thank you, Martha. Nicholas, I'm going to move on to you. And you've also referenced that text makes it a little bit easier for you. But are there any other parameters that you like setting for yourself when you're composing? Or do you prefer to just kind of sit down with a blank canvas and see what happens? You also said that you kind of have a theme that you like doing right now. Do you maybe also prefer to kind of do things by themes? I don't know. Just tell us a little bit more about your composing process.
Yeah. Um, I often am asked the question about parameters. I think anybody who is a creator, an artist, has this uh, what's the word? The dilemma, do I or the options. It may not be a dilemma. It may just be, in which direction shall I go? We can write things that are completely free form without any parameters, without any restrictions, or we can try to write something within a particular framework. And more often than not, I think I go towards having at least a few parameters to work in, because that provides a framework, it provides direction, and you can sort of see the end that you're working towards, which makes the whole creative process, for me anyway, easier. And so some parameters are good, because they allow me to focus on particular musical ideas. And it's actually interesting. I find at the moment I'm writing some graded piano pieces for a particular publisher who shall remain nameless. And for each grade level, the publisher has provided very specific criteria for each piece. So tempo, time signature, key, style, and so forth. And I've actually found that it's not as difficult as I thought it would be to write a piece within these very strict guidelines, and so far I'm quite happy with what I've written, and I think the publisher is too. But we'll see. We'll see if they make it all the way through the process.
Oh, I'm sure they will. That's really great. Thank you. Angelina, you mentioned that you compose for your students, and all of that, which would create kind of a set of parameters for you to work with as well, because you know kind of what level they're at and what they're working on, what you want them to learn. Do you ever just sit down and create whatever your heart tells you that day, or do you as well prefer to work within a specific set of parameters?
I actually feel very similar to Nicholas and Martha on this one. I enjoy parameters. I find that it helps me to be concise and it gives me direction. And then on top of that, I actually think it challenges my creativity more than just sitting down at the piano and or whatever and writing something from scratch with all the possibilities there. I think having limitations has its own set of challenges and almost forces you to be more creative because you have to imagine within that framework. I actually It's interesting what you mentioned, Nicholas, about the very specific parameters. I'm actually doing something similar right now, writing a series of pieces with very specific parameters that have been given to me. And I initially thought it would be quite challenging to adhere to it, but honestly, I've loved it. And it's concise. It helps me to sort of um, set set sort of a goal very quickly. And it keeps my work very clean, I guess. So I agree that parameters are actually great, although I think sometimes it is fun to just sit down and try something fresh from scratch. But I do love parameters, and sometimes I will give myself parameters. So like a level or maybe a key or a mode or something. Or if I'm given parameters by someone like a publisher, then I think that's extra interesting because I'm not the one creating those boundaries. And for me, that elicits more creativity, I think. Can I do this very specific thing and still make it fun, still make it interesting? So I actually love parameters.
That's amazing. And when you are composing for your students, do you like introducing them to different things? And do you find that they're more receptive to, for example, if you're going to write something in like a sonata allegro form, um, do you find that they find it more interesting if you write it for them because obviously they know you and you're alive, you're tangible, you're not like hundreds of years ago, which kids have no concept of what that even means, right? Do you find that they engage better with different styles and types of music that way?
I think being I think there's an intrigue to knowing the composer for kids. And then I think it also depends on the style. Like I find in my studio, my students are drawn to certain types of music, and which tends to be a little bit more modern sounding, more pop rock. So I think that's another factor that gets them sort of motivated to play. Doesn't mean that's all they should be playing. I love Bach and I will, yeah. But I think they do find just the idea of a composer who is alive or that they know some information about. I think they find that fascinating and motivating as well. So there's two elements to that. I think it's the sounds being more familiar to them in modern music, but then also just the familiarity of the person.
That makes a lot of sense. I did a lot of the summer sizzle um, music camps when I was growing up, and that was one of the things that I really loved. Like I loved that I was able to meet um, Debbie, I was able to meet Martha, I was able to meet Andrew Harbridge, and just interact with them. And I am the kind of person that I'll put like the composer on this pedestal and I'm like, oh my goodness, like they can do no wrong, you know? But in those situations, it's like, oh, like we're both human. Oh, that's so crazy. Oh, cool. And then you're almost not as afraid to play their music as well, because it kind of breaks down that barrier of, oh, I can't make a mistake or the composer will be mad at me, you know? Um, yeah.
I think too, the humanness of that allows them to see, oh, maybe one day I can also compose. It's not something for someone far off that I don't know, you know. This is something that I can maybe aspire to as well. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, Nick.
I just wanted to comment before you change the direction on this whole thing about parameters and so forth. Um, just the other day, I was reading an article, I think it was in the Globe and Mail, that really resonated for me. It was in the opinion section, and it was about how um, we can explore an idea or a place or when we're young, for example, often we will go out and travel and backpack around Europe was the thing to do when I was a university student. um, and then the other side of the coin, if you like, is to exploit, um, in other words, stick with one idea, one place, and go deeper. And so I think as teachers, for example, when we're working with young people, we want them to work with very few parameters and just go go for it, and explore all these different ideas. And certainly, when I was at university studying composition, that's what we were encouraged to do. And I wrote for all kinds of weird and wonderful combinations of instruments and uh, experimented with minimalism and all kinds of other kinds of styles. Now that I'm in my 60s, I tend not. I've pretty much found the kinds of styles that work for me. Um, the combinations of instruments that I like writing for, and so I tend to exploit, in a smaller framework, those kinds of things. So I just think that's an interesting idea to think about as well.
It definitely is because with younger people, they often tend to just be brimming with ideas. And if you have like, 7 to 10-year-olds, like they're still very much in that play stage, right? So if you just tell them essentially just go and play with the music, just have fun, like find whatever you want to do with it, and go for it, then that will often work. I find when I'm introducing students to improvising, some of them just freeze though. And then it's like, okay, all right, we're gonna give you like this little set of parameters that you can work with. Like let's do C, D, and E. You can do that. Like you can create some kind of rhythm with that, and then they can kind of become comfortable with just interacting with music in a different way. But more often they just love being playful and trying things out. Yeah. Angelina, I'm gonna go back to you, and we've already talked a little bit about with Martha about perfection or imperfection when we're composing or performing or whatever, but um, I wanted to ask you as well, do you have a problem ever perfecting a piece? And if so, how do you deal with that? And I hesitate to say perfect because is anything ever really done, you know? So that's a anyway, I'm just interested to see what your response to that is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing that I would say is time away from the piece. Just much like writing essays. I mean, in university days, is you write the piece, you put it away, come back to a couple days later, and you review it and go, okay, so here's another perspective. So sometimes just sleeping on it. Um, Another thing for me personally, that I'm really lucky to live with a spouse who's also a composer and very musical. So if I run into something that I'm just like, I have this idea, but it's just not working, or I'm getting stuck on the spot, I just don't like how this is working out for me. Um, I will bring it up in conversation for another perspective, maybe some feedback. And sometimes it's just even nice to hear someone else say, hey, you know what? I actually really like it the way it is. So it doesn't always mean that when we feel like it's not done, sometimes hearing somebody else's perspective, being affirmative that this is actually good, or I like what you've done here, can be nice and affirming. So there's, I guess, two ways of looking at that. Sometimes there is more to be done, and sometimes it's time to just say, you know what, this is how I'm going to leave it.
That inner critic likes to come in all the time though and just try to convince you that there's always something that could be changed and better and everything. So that's tricky to kind of override.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Martha, do you ever have a problem? We were talking about text and those things, but when you're writing the actual music, do you ever have a problem with feeling like a piece is done or perfect?
Well, I'm never looking for perfection because I am far from perfect and I don't have the bandwidth to be perfect. And but I think the idea of going away from something and coming back and looking at it again is just even the next morning, I can work late one night on something and I know, okay, go to bed, wake up, see what, and it's like totally different piece and your mind is clear. Just like, you go to bed with a problem, any problem, you're mad at somebody and you wake up in the morning, like, oh, why was I so worried about that? And the other thing in my writing, I think, is that I always want there to be a wild moment or an out of serious moment. Or I think in my writing, I always want to feel like I let loose if it was just for one wonderful note or something unexpected or a surprise or so that's definitely imperfect.
Well, I brought you last night for two reasons, but the main one was the agenda's up.
And so
Well, I could have let you know I had
Sorry, Ruth thank you. Perfect. All right.
uh,
Sorry, continue.
that's okay. Yeah. So I like that moment of imperfection. I think it drives the music. It kind of, but the thing that does happen for me is that the closer I get to the finished product, the more limited my choices are, and I love that part. And I'm thinking that one note is what I need. What is that one note? Or that one rhythm isn't quite right. That kind of finalization and it's like a giant puzzle to me, and when you get closer and closer to the end of it, it just starts to make more and more sense, and it's such a wonderful creative process, and also I love it that I don't feel like I'm being judged because I am writing it from my own brain, that nobody out there can say, Martha, that's not right. That doesn't follow the rules. And I'm thinking, well, it follows the rules of, this imagination. I don't know. It feels very freeing. And I guess that's why I love doing it so much.
What a beautiful and very healthy life perspective, actually, to just not be worried about what other people are thinking or saying about what you're doing and um, just going for it because you know that you have something beautiful and unique to say, and that's amazing.
I don't know if it's amazing, but it's the only way I've been able to kind of figure out how to be a composer in a very judgmental, critical, musical environment because we all go to university, we're constantly being graded and assessed, and even in university, we're told what style we should be writing in, and you know, I think that once you free yourself from that, of course you need the education, but once you free yourself from that, then that's when you get to be a creative artist. And sometimes your ideas work, and sometimes they don't. But you can't blame anybody. That's just the way it went. And it's not my job to understand why it went that way. It's just the way I created. So it's very freeing to think that once it's on the page, it's out of my responsibility. A little bit.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. All right, Nicholas, do you ever have a problem with feeling like your piece is complete and you don't need to add anything or change anything anymore?
Uh, well, I can relate to what Martha said about leaving a piece for a while. Usually, when I'm working on something, I reach a stage where it seems to be done, you know, and I might not be 100% happy with it, but I just don't see where else it can go, or and I'll leave it, maybe for the next day, maybe for a couple of weeks, or even several months, you know. And then I come back to it and with a completely different perspective because I've pretty much forgotten what the piece was, you know. So I'm coming back to it perhaps after a long time and reminding myself what it was that I wrote. And usually when I do that, it doesn't seem so bad after all, you know. Um, and the other little thing that came to mind when I saw your questions a few days ago is that I used to study composition with Stephen Chapman in Vancouver, and one of the things that I always remember him saying to me is that if a particular passage or note or bar or whatever seems redundant or it seems not to fit in, if you question whether it should be there or not, get rid of it. Even if you really, really like it, if you question it, then it probably doesn't belong there. So get rid of it. Sometimes there's a passage that I really quite like of itself, So I'll take it out of that piece and I'll store it away somewhere, with the idea that I might use it again later in another piece. Usually that doesn't happen; it just gets lost in the files. But that's certainly something that I've always taken to heart, that I learned from Stephen Chapman. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I have found that actually in the few times that I've kind of tried composing a little bit, I have realized that I can get a little stuck on this idea, and actually, even though it's a pretty cool idea in and of itself, it's keeping me from moving forward and moving where the piece needs to go. And then, you rip a little piece of your heart out and you just like get rid of that. And then all of a sudden the piece comes together. And yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up. That's very interesting that Stephen told you that when you were studying with him as well. Amazing. All right, our final question. I'm very excited, and you all have, I think, kind of alluded to various things that you are either working on or wanting to work on. But Angelina, I'm going to go back to you, and can you just tell us a little bit more, if you are at liberty to say anything, about any projects that you have on the go, or some dreams that are starting to formulate about what you want to work on. Just tell us a little bit more of what you're currently doing.
So I'm in a bit of a slower phase right now in my musical work. I just had a baby, and so things are a little bit different for me. But it's actually nice because I get a little bit more removed from my normal workspace, and it makes me, I think, more creative. So having a newborn is also beautifully and inspiring. So I think it's twofold. I'm taking a little bit of a slower approach to my work. But also still doing a little bit, which is, it's really nice to have a creative outlet. So one of the things I'm working on right now is my husband and I are almost ready to release the second level of invitations to improvisation. So this is something that we started, I think, a couple years ago. It's basically a guide to help teachers incorporate improv into their lessons. I find that as a teacher, it's so easy to get focused on performance and preparing for festivals and exams and recitals and all these things, that it's really hard to actually incorporate improv into the lesson and make time for it unless you have something specific that you're working towards. So that's our idea with that, is just to give any teacher a resource to be able to incorporate improv without feeling like they need to be experts themselves. It's so simple, little exercises for them to do in lessons, in group classes, or even at home. Because I think I would have benefited from that as a student, but then also as I started teaching piano, to have some sort of guide to help me incorporate it into my lessons. So that's something that's pretty close to done, but it should be out soon. And then I'm working on pieces for a series that I can't share right now, but I'm working on some pieces, which has been really fun because while I'm slowing down on my musical work at the moment, it's nice to sit down and be creative, here and there when I have a moment, even if my newborn is babbling on the ground or whatever. It's been fun. So yeah, I'm looking forward to, even after sort of this phase of life comes to a close, maybe doing some other things. We've got lots of ideas. So yeah.
That's so exciting. And maybe you can include some of those cute little baby babbles, and no one else will know what it's about, but you'll know that it's hidden away. I love the invitations to improv idea as well. I think definitely, like you were saying, that can feel, especially if someone has had maybe a more traditional musical experience, it can feel very scary to kind of go into that world a little bit. And sometimes as teachers, you have a week where you don't feel that creative and you're like, I don't know what kind of improv thing I should do with my students this week. So just having that support would be really great.
Yeah, that's part of the inspiration for me for sure. And yeah, back to the topic of my newborn, we were joking. I should title one of my pieces The 3 a.m. Lullaby.
I'm sure you'd get a lot of young parents that would relate really well with that. That's amazing. And Martha, can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on right now?
Well, I'm also in a collaborative thing with my husband, but it's not a musical collaboration really. I'm the musician, and he's an astronomer by trade. Although he, in his retirement, he thinks he's a rock and roll musician. He's playing guitar in a band, and he's found his dream career at in retirement. Anyway, he's an astronomer, and I. I love hearing him talk about his work, and I love, you know, watching him explain things, and I'm so fascinated by his work, but I never really understand it. And my eyes kind of roll back in my head, sometimes when he talks about the universe and all that. So during COVID, we didn't know what to do with ourselves, and we decided to join forces. And so we started this thing called the Pianist's Guide to the Universe. And our aim was to have 4 volumes, and we did volume 1, Stories of Stars, volume 2, Sailing on the Solar Wind, and volume 4, Spirals in the Sky. Volume 3 is dark, and I haven't done that yet. I'm a little afraid of the dark, but it's going to be for angsty late intermediate teenagers, so it'll be like dark things. But it's been really exciting to have a team going. Titles and fighting over the text that he's going to use in the book, and can I understand it? If I can't understand it, a 10-year-old isn't going to understand it. And now we've started giving presentations, so that we're involving me playing, him speaking, and then what do you call them? Slides and videos, NASA and these crazy things from the Hubble Space Telescope and all that. So it's it's really kind of fun, and the really cool thing for me is that I am a pianist, but I don't practice, and I spend most of my time writing. So I'm a shy performer, and I love doing snippets of what I'm working on, or show a student something from a piece that they're working on. No problem. But if I have to play a whole thing, or convince you that I'm a performing pianist, I'm a little bit shy about it. But when we do it together, and he starts talking, and the images start coming up on stage, I realize that I'm just a small part of this. It's not all on me. And it's really improved my experience in playing publicly. It's very bizarre, but it feels like teamwork rather than this solo thing. And my notes aren't only in conjunction with the science and the visual stuff. So it's been really kind of a fun project. So we're not
That's a
quite done, but
really
we're getting.
Yeah, I love that. It's like a different type of chamber music. I mean, he's not playing an instrument, but it really is. And that's the beauty of chamber music that I find is that it also takes the pressure off you a little bit because you're sharing the responsibility of the moment, I guess. And also just so cool that you're like creating this like different multimedia presentation for young minds to create these connections between like outer space and stars and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
very cool.
the other cool thing is, because we don't know, there's no sound out there, right? And we don't really have any idea of what the sound would be. I'm totally free to go crazy with my imagination, there's no limits. Although he would sometimes come by my studio and say, "You're not going to use that kind of ending, are you?" And I'm thinking, "Wait a minute, I'm the composer here."
Said in true love,
Anyway,
I'm sure.
yeah. Anyway, it's been fun.
Yeah, that's so neat. Wow. All right, Nicholas, you said that you're working on the kind of climate change project. Is that kind of the big thing that you're working on, or is there anything else that you have on the go right now?
Yeah, I've got a few things on the go. I'm currently re-editing some older piano pieces for publication. And then I mentioned I'm writing some new piano pieces as well. I also just finished a pair of choral works based on texts by a writer from England, and one has already been performed here in Victoria. The other one's going to be premiered this Saturday in St Andrews, Scotland. So unfortunately, I won't be there, but they're going to make a recording for me. And then over the years, I've had a few opportunities to travel to distant places in to take part in a residency program. So you can be entirely focused on the creative process and surround yourself with other creators, or be entirely by yourself. And so a number of years ago now, I had an opportunity to go to the Norwegian Arctic, and I wrote a large choral work called Isbjørn, which is a Norwegian word for polar bear. And a few years later, I went to the Peruvian jungle at the headwaters of the Amazon, and I wrote a larger work for choir and orchestra called Canción Amazónica, Song of the Amazon. And so I'm really excited to have another similar opportunity, though not quite so far afield. I'm getting ready to travel to Dublin, Ireland in the spring, and I'll be collaborating with some Irish writers and musicians to create a new piece for singers and instrumentalists. So that's sort of my big project coming up.
Those are some very cool adventures that you've gotten to do. When you're writing those pieces, do you like you're collaborating with people in the area? So do you include like different kind of ideas and sounds from that area as well?
Yeah, certainly. For example, the program that I was on when I was in the Arctic, it was on board a sailing ship, and there were about 25 of us from different disciplines sailing together around some islands way up uh, north of Norway. And so I was roommates with a writer from California. So he wrote some of the text for me. And when I was in Peru, I was looking around for texts that I could use there. And so I was able to find some local writers who wrote in Spanish or in Quechua, which is one of the local indigenous languages. And so I use them in my work as well. So who knows what will happen in Ireland? I know that I'm going to be encouraged to write in Irish Gaelic. And I did a bit of research, and it is a very difficult language, I think, for non-speakers to pronounce. So we'll have to see how that works out with singers, and if I'm to bring the piece back to Canada and have Canadian singers perform it, might be a challenge, but we'll see how that goes.
That would be a cool way to make sure, though, that the language stays alive in a certain sense, because I think there's been a real push in Ireland to kind of bring back the Gaelic language to make
Mm,
sure that the younger generation still keeps it as part of their heritage and everything.
that's right.
All right. Very cool. All right. Thank you so much to each one of you for coming today for this discussion. This has been so interesting, and I've learned so much from each one of you. I've been inspired by each one of you. And I just love how you're all doing your own unique things and where you're at, and it's all very cool. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you, Lois, for the invitation. It's been great to talk to you all and connect with you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
All right. Happy Canada Music Week, everyone. Enjoy your afternoon.